Hello and welcome. It is Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. All right, regular season has come to a close.
All done.
We were at Oregon. Autzen Stadium was fantastic. Everyone's talking about, or a lot of people have been talking about, all the costumes people were wearing around the stadium. I only cared about one costume that was worn, and that was by a baby who got thrown up in the air. It seemed every single time there was a timeout, they would show this baby on the big screen at Autzen, and the crowd went absolutely nuts.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. You could tell. I don't know if the baby was into it, but the dad or whoever it was that was hoisting him definitely was into it, and the crowd was into it. So I didn't really notice any other costumes other than, I'm always amazed by the uniform choice of Oregon.
Yeah.
In this case, the metallic silver helmet, the gray pants, the black jersey, and the slightest outline of green around the number and the name on the back, on the nameplate. Outside of that, you'd never know green was part of the Oregon color scheme. So anyway.
Yeah. Couple of the Oregon employees before the game said, I hope you don't confuse us and say that we're the Oregon Raiders by the end of the game. I said, I got you. Don't worry. We'll be ready. It is the Ducks. Let's start with this game and just quickly go through. We kind of expected that Oregon was the better team against Washington. And look, just to echo what we said on the broadcast, the season Washington had was impressive given the turnover they dealt with and given what Jedd Fisch was handed to start this season. But a 49-21 win for the Ducks. Dylan Gabriel and company looked sharp. The defense, again, looked really impressive.
Yeah. And I think they got out of it what they wanted, aside from the win, which was to play better on offense, play cleaner, be more effective and explosive on offense, which they were. Dylan Gabriel, a little over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, ran for 1. Jordan James, 99 yards and 2 touchdowns. So they had that balance working. A couple of penalties set them back, but they really looked a lot better than they did 2 weeks ago against Wisconsin. So I think that was one of their main goals to offensively, kind of get back to their standard, which I thought they did. Defensively, they continued to shine. As good news for them was they got Tez Johnson and Jordan Birch back in the lineup. I mean, they didn't play a ton of snaps, but they're at least back in the fold. And now the only other question will be Marcus Harper, who had been their starting right guard, if he's going to be good to go this week in the Big Ten championship game or not.
Well, the question going into the week wasn't whether they were going to play in the Big Ten championship. That had already been confirmed. It was who would they play against. And the betting favorite was Ohio State coming into the week. And that was put to bed after the early slate of games. The game was the biggest of the week, obviously, just in terms of storylines and how it all played out. Michigan and Ohio State, you thought going in, okay, Ohio State number 2 in the country, playing some pretty good ball. And sure enough, here comes the Michigan Wolverines, and what was the win to basically solidify their season as somewhat of a success. They get to 7-5, but they do it in dramatic fashion in Columbus, 13-10.
Yeah, and I guess this is why we love college football, right? Because it just can be so unpredictable. If there was ever a lock, coming into this weekend or this past weekend, I would have thought this was the lock game of all, and that's taking nothing away from Michigan, but Ohio State had been playing really well. They're playing at home. They had lost 3 in a row to Michigan. They're clearly the better team on paper. The roster is stronger, deeper. And they just got outplayed. They did not play well. Will Howard had been playing great, did not play well in this game, had 2 costly interceptions. I mean, Michigan threw 2 interceptions as well, so it wasn't like they were lighting the house on fire either, but they were better in the trenches. Kalel Mullings had over 100 yards rushing in the game, 116, and scored a touchdown. And the defense held Ohio State to 77 yards rushing. In this game, more than any other game, whoever wins the rushing battle typically wins this game. I think that's now 23 times in a row. Whoever wins the rushing battle in this game wins the game. And look, we knew all season that Michigan had talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. They have quarterback issues. Their offensive line was not what it's been. Their wide receiver group was just okay. But we knew they had defensive players, particularly in their front 7. And at times they looked great. At other times they didn't look great this year. But boy, they looked great. They showed up and played Saturday. And those 2 guys, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant on the inside dominated the line of scrimmage. And they just, Ohio State just could not establish any run game, and they couldn't control the line of scrimmage. And as improbable as it was, Michigan comes away with the win. And the other thing that we didn't even mention, that Zabata, the kicker from Michigan, has been outstanding all year. He's 2 for 2, including the game winner with 45 seconds left. And Ohio State missed 2 easy chip shot field goals. So everything that could have gone wrong for Ohio State in this game did go wrong.
Let's not forget, no Colston Loveland and no Will Johnson for Michigan.
Right.
I mean, 2 of their best players, certainly their best offensive player. I mean, Colston Loveland is going to be an elite tight end for a long time in the NFL. And Will Johnson is someone who's going to be a first-round pick in the NFL draft at cornerback. I mean, those are 2 high-impact players, did not play in this game. There were the ugly scenes after the game with the fight between the teams, and we saw that across college football really on Saturday. It just felt like every rivalry game, it was that rivalry week came to fruition in some ugly ways. But on top of all of that, you look at where this leaves Ohio State, they're still likely going to make the college football playoff. And so it's this weird dichotomy of, okay, there's no recovering in some senses from this because this is the biggest game on the calendar in Columbus. And we've talked about what this means to the fan base, to the alumni base, to the players on the team, the seniors that all came back for this exact moment and will never get their gold pants. But at the same time, they're still going to have an opportunity to play for a national championship. And so the season's not completely lost, but they have to find it pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's not. And probably it's a good thing, honestly, that they don't have to turn around and play next week, because they're not in the Big Ten championship game. So they have some time to put some distance between this game and the taste of this game away from them, and get it out of their mouth a little bit before they do play again. Chances are they not only lost a chance to play for the Big Ten championship, they lost a chance potentially to host a playoff game. They're probably going to be on the road somewhere as the visiting team. And it almost feels like anything short of winning it all this season is going to feel like a big failure to a lot of people, not just the fans of Ohio State, but the players, the coaches, because, everything was kind of in place for them to have an incredible season. They spent a lot of money on their roster. It was a good roster, and they came up short twice now.
So no Ohio State is mentioned in the Big Ten championship game. Who does that leave? It was going to be a matter of Penn State or Indiana. Penn State controlled their own destiny, and they got it done in a big way. 44-7 victory over Maryland for your alma mater.
Yeah, and I'm happy for them. I really am. I'm not sure. I tried to figure out how they held the tiebreaker edge over Indiana.
Don't hurt your brain because none of us know.
It, but I'm glad. I'm happy for Penn State. First time they've been in the game since 2016. So that's been a long drought. And that was the whole thing with the idea of the conference expanding and them doing away with the divisions, that this was going to be good for Penn State and a great opportunity for them, because they had not been able to get through Ohio State and Michigan the last several years to get in this game. So, the division went away. They didn't play Michigan. They didn't play Oregon in the regular season. They played Ohio State at home and did not play great and lost the game, but that's their only loss. And they had some close games along the way. A close game on the West Coast against USC, a close game in Minneapolis a couple weeks ago against Minnesota, where they had to convert 3 4th-down plays. But I think that they're playing really good football. I think their defense has been solid. I think Drew Aller has had a really, really good year. And I think Tyler Warren is spectacular. I think there are 2 unicorns in college football this season, and one is Tyler Warren, the other one is Travis Hunter, that can do all kind of different things and create so much of a dilemma for the teams trying to defend them. And so congratulations to Penn State. And you know what? I think they can play with Oregon. Now, they don't have a marquee win on their schedule, against a highly ranked, highly competitive team. Illinois, I guess, would that be the best win that they have over a 9-3 Illinois team, who's a good team? But this will be a major step up in competition level and what will, the kind of game they'll need to play next weekend to have a chance to beat Oregon.
Tyler Warren, Big Ten record for single season receptions by a tight end. Penn State's all-time leader in touchdown catches by a tight end. So the remarkable season, at least in the regular season, comes to a close on a high note. Now we'll see what he can do moving forward, both in the Big Ten championship and in the college football playoff. Some other rivalry games from the Big Ten this weekend. Let's go to Indiana, coming off their first loss of the season last week. They have Purdue, and they just throttled them. And this was somewhat expected, but 66-0, the final score for the Oaken Bucket.
Yeah, I mean, what a dismal performance by Purdue all season, but maybe they saved their worst for last, and unfortunately it cost Ryan Walters his job. But I mean, they got just annihilated in this game and got outgained. What was it, 589-67? I mean, that's just that's unheard of, to be that thoroughly dominated. But you knew with just Kurt Cignetti and just his personality and coming off that loss and people questioning, should you be a playoff team? And, you knew they were going to come out here and going all the way back to his first introduction at the basketball game when he led by saying Purdue sucks. I mean, you knew he was going to try to put it on him as much as he could. And so a dominant performance by Indiana, a great bounce back for them. They get the old Oaken Bucket and probably secured their place in the college football playoff in the way they played as well.
Hard to say anything else, especially considering some of the results of this past week and Miami faltering at the end of the regular season. But we'll wait to see what the new playoff rankings look like this week. We're recording this on a Monday, so the playoff rankings have not come out yet for this week after everything happened this past weekend. Speaking of, in Los Angeles, Notre Dame travels in their rivalry game against USC and beats the Trojans 49-35. You say, okay, 2-touchdown win, but it was a lot closer than that into the fourth quarter before Notre Dame started to pull away.
Yeah, I mean, look, USC offensively was moving the ball.
Yeah.
Jaden Maeva threw for 360 yards. He accounted for 5 touchdowns. But at the end of the day, he also threw 2 pick sixes in the fourth quarter. One was returned 99 yards. The other one was returned 100 yards. It was actually caught by Xavier Watts 3 yards deep in the end zone. But, I mean, they're going in to score. They're deep in the red zone when those interceptions happen, and they were pick sixes. And so a game that was 21-21 and then 28-21 and pretty close and competitive ended up as a blowout, And so 2 touchdowns scored by the Notre Dame defense. And then the running game, really shined for Notre Dame. 260 yards rushing. USC really could not handle the combination of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. I mean, they were too much for him.
We love trophy games around here. The Big Ten is chock full of them. One of the better ones is for that Paul Bunyan axe, and Minnesota claims it to end Wisconsin's long 20-plus year bowl streak. 24-7 the final. Brosmer again, a really just solid performance.
Yeah, solid performance. He's had a really good year. I mean, this is a 7-win Minnesota team. Could have even been a little bit better than that. You go back to that opening game against North Carolina that they should have won. Should have won against Penn State 2 weeks ago. I mean, this is very close to being a 9 or 10 win Minnesota team. And how appropriate that they get this win on PJ Fleck's 44th birthday. Darius Taylor also played really well, 143 yards rushing. But, I think Minnesota's defense has been a little bit underrated all year, too. I think they've played outstanding, and that's a good 7-win football team.
Coy Parrish has been fantastic all year in his freshman season, one of the higher touted recruits to get to Minnesota in a long time. So they're excited for the future that he possesses. 22 years of consistent bowl eligibility comes to a close for Wisconsin, and we'll see what they do in terms of roster construction heading into next year. And the last
coaching staff too, they've got to hire a new offensive coordinator. They got to do some rebooting up there in Madison for sure.
1,000%. We'll see what they look like through the offseason. Iowa and Nebraska, this was on Friday, and Iowa goes down a couple scores and then just plays some Iowa football. Defense always seems to travel when they need it, always seems to find its way to the mountaintop, and they win at 13-10.
Yeah, this was as Iowa as an Iowa football game can get. They go down 10-0 at half, then they shut Nebraska out in the second half. It's cold. They get a strip sack with 20 seconds left that sets up a game-winning field goal, and just a slobber knocker in the Big Ten in the late November, and Iowa comes away with the win. That's 8 wins for Iowa. And, they had quarterback problems. They played 3 different quarterbacks this season. They had to because of injury. So Jackson Stratton actually had a decent game, 115 yards throwing, and he threw a touchdown. Caleb Johnson only had 45 yards rushing. However, he did have a 72-yard touchdown reception. It was just a little swing pass. So it was, in essence, an outside running play. Caught it and made some people miss, broke a few tackles, and took it to the house. So he still had a major impact on the game, just not from the running back position.
Just the consistency of the Iowa program. Even in what was looked at as a down year in Iowa City, they still finish 8-4 in the regular season. It's just a credit to Kirk Ferentz and the entire coaching staff. And obviously, we've talked a lot about Phil Parker on this podcast and how much respect we have for him and the job that he does with that defense. They prove it again in their final game of the regular season.
Yeah, kind of cool last night, too, just watching the game and watching how well Cooper DeJean is playing for the Eagles. And, we saw him early in the year, and he was just kind of in some spot situations, and his role has increased over the course of the year, and he shows up now. He makes plays.
Yeah, PFF has graded him as one of the best defensive backs in the entire league this year, and he is not just a spot guy anymore. He's a consistent starter. They put him in the nickel, and he has been just outstanding. A lockdown corner, basically looking like he did when he was a Hawkeye, which has been very impressive. Illinois, as you mentioned, picked up their 9th win, beat Northwestern pretty handily. Rutgers got their 7th win of the season, beat Michigan State. Michigan State finishes at 5-7. Big Ten championship, you mentioned that this could be a fun game. Penn State could certainly hang with Oregon. Just take a deeper dive into this. You mentioned also that this is an opportunity for them to really have that solidified big win on their schedule, which they just didn't quite claim, did Penn State, during the regular season.
No, they didn't. They had the one opponent that was highly ranked. That was Ohio State, and they had them at home, and they didn't play well enough to win. They got off to an early lead. I think they were up 10-0 in that game, and then kind of went to sleep after that and couldn't do anything more. So, and they're going against a team in Oregon that really has no weaknesses. Offensively, they don't have any weaknesses. There's been a little issue with the right guard position, but not dramatic. So, not the same kind of O-line issues that Ohio State has faced, losing 2 starters, their center and their left tackle. That became evident of an issue. Not so much with Oregon. Skill guys, great. Running back is a stud. Quarterback's playing lights out. So offensively, 2 really good tight ends, no issues. Defensively, no apparent weaknesses on this defense. So, Penn State is going to have to play extremely well, and they've got to do a couple things to have a chance to win the game. Number one, they've got to establish their run game. All right, those 2 backs have to be factors in the game. Tyler Warren running the ball, Bo Pribula running the ball. They have to be effective running the football and not allow Oregon to make them one-dimensional. And I think they can do that. I do think that they can establish some running game. And then defensively, the only way to really slow Oregon down, especially with how Dylan Gabriel is playing and the decision-making that he has, is you have to get him off schedule a little bit. Now they might do it themselves with penalties, but tackles for loss, sacks, those are ways of getting them off schedule. And Penn State's really good at that. They're good at attacking the line of scrimmage. Abdul Carter, I'm not sure that Oregon has seen somebody like him yet on their schedule. So they're going to have to account for him. He had 2 sacks on Saturday. The team had 6 sacks. So they've got to get after the quarterback and make Dylan Gabriel uncomfortable. Even if they don't sack him, they have to affect him in a real positive way. And then takeaways, which Penn State is also good at, taking the ball away. So those are the ways you slow them down, create some negative plays, and if you can, take the ball away.
Will be interesting to see how that Oregon front fares in this game. They had double-digit sacks this past weekend against Washington. Yeah. They were wreaking havoc. And if Birch gets a little healthier, which he played a decent amount this past week after missing 4 of 6 games, now you've got Birch and Uyunglele and Caldwell and Harmon all up front. That is a difficult deal for anybody to have to worry about consistently. The other thing that you mentioned post-game the other night, that I think does reign true with this. The winner here gets the bye, obviously, and is likely going to be the number 1 seed, if not number 2. It's either going to be Oregon at number 1 or maybe Penn State behind Texas at 2, whatever it might be, depending on how things play out. But you're going to get a bye, and the loser is going to get to host a game. It feels pretty inevitable.
It's a win-win. It's a win-win. Yeah, that's a win-win situation. I'm sure as a coach, maybe you would prefer to have that extra time, just one less game of wear and tear, one less game where you risk a guy getting injured or nicked up a little bit to where he's not 100% your next time out. But, having another home game in December is going to be pretty awesome for any of those teams that finish ranked 5 through 8 that get to host.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. Let's go through some team grades through the year, and we'll go through different tiers and start with the A tier. It feels like it's pretty obvious Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State all deserve to be in that A tier. Would you say Illinois at a 9-3 season is also an A team grade for their 2024 season?
Yeah, I would definitely give them an A grade. I think Brett Bielema did an excellent job this season. They had a losing season last year. They didn't. They underachieved a little bit. They had injuries they had to overcome. I think it's a very, very solid year for Illinois. And even in this last game, I didn't even know who this guy is. I didn't see the highlights, but this Aiden Lockery, who had been hurt with a hamstring most of the season, he ran 12 times for 172 yards and 3 touchdowns in the game. And so, you imagine if they'd have had him all year to go with the other guys they had, who knows? But 9 wins, I give them an A tier grade.
Where do you put Ohio State? Because 10-2, obviously a pretty successful season. They're a couple plays away from being 12-0, but they obviously don't get to that 12-0 mark. They lose by 1 in Eugene, and then the biggest loss that could possibly happen this past week against Michigan.
Yeah, I have to put them as a B tier grade. I would not put them as an A tier because, they had the best roster in the league. I mean,
maybe in the country.
In the country, and they paid for it. They invested in it. Guys came back that had a chance to go play in the NFL, and they lost 2 games. Okay, the 1 point loss on the road to Oregon, who's number 1 and has been number 1 since week 6. That's acceptable. That's understandable. Okay, it's a 1 point game. What happened on Saturday at home in Columbus is both inexplainable or inexplicable, and there's just no reason for it. And again, I'm not taking anything away from Michigan because I'm putting Michigan in a B tier grade for that win because it was such a significant win for them and Sharon Moore in his first year. So, but Ohio State, there was just more expected of them, not just by the outside world, but by the program themselves. And I remember, I'm not saying this got them, but when we first started doing this podcast and we started talking about Ohio State, I said, I don't love hearing this natty or bust, that natty or bust mentality, because I don't know if that allows you to just enjoy and relax and embrace and savor all of it, especially those guys that were coming back for their last season. Were they able to really savor the relationships and just the experiences of playing in college and playing at Ohio State one last time? Or was it just so bent on we have to win every game. We have to win every game. We've got to beat Michigan. We got to do this. I don't know. I'm not in the locker room, not around the program, so I don't really know. But anyway, it at the end of the day, it's kind of an underachievement at this point. And the crazy thing is, and Joshua Perry would back us up on this, even if they go all the way and win the whole thing, there will be some Ohio State people that will not be thrilled with the season.
Yeah, they'll consider this season a failure even as national champions. So you mentioned that Ohio State, Michigan would be B tier. I agree with you on the Wolverines. To get 7-5 with the quarterback issues they had, you have to at least be somewhat excited for what this win can now do to propel you forward with an elite quarterback prospect coming in. Iowa 8-4 feels like a B tier for them, not what we know they're capable of. Minnesota 7-5. Where do you put teams like a Washington, a Nebraska, a Rutgers? They're teams that, are bowl eligible, but not necessarily upper echelon.
Yeah, you know what? I would put Rutgers as a B tier. Of those teams you named, Rutgers is the one that I would put up there, like next to Minnesota,
Mm,
because at one point, because of injuries and whatnot, Rutgers was on a 4-game losing skid. And just the
true.
fact that Greg Schiano was able to keep that team together and not let that thing get disjointed and go south, and then come back and finish strong and win not just 6 to get bowl eligible, but to win 7. So I think that was a good finish for Rutgers, and Kyle Monangai, one of the best players in the Big Ten, one of the best backs in the Big Ten, and there were 4 or 5 really really talented running backs in the league this year, and he certainly was one of them.
Where would you put USC, Wisconsin, Michigan State, and UCLA? You've got one team that's bowl eligible, that's USC, but there were a lot more expectation than just winning
Right.
6 games. And the other 3 mentioned, all 5-7 to finish the season.
Yeah, I mean, I would put all those on the C tier. USC would kind of be teetering between a D plus, C minus almost,
Yeah.
just because I think of all those teams, they were clearly the most talented team.
Yep.
And I think the expectations, deservedly so, were and should have been higher for USC. And so to finish 6-6, which is just like, average, like kissing your sisters, it's like a tie. I mean, they should have been better than that, right? They should have been better than 6-6 with the talent they had on their roster.
No doubt. And the last couple teams, Northwestern 4-8, Maryland 4-8, and Purdue, as mentioned now, without Ryan Walters moving forward, finishes 1-11 on the season.
Yeah, well, look, I wouldn't put all 3 of those together either. I would put Northwestern and Maryland together as four-win teams as the D tier, and then I'd have to create an F tier for Purdue because, again, 1-11 and their worst performance of the season. They fire their offensive coordinator midway through. They have their worst offensive and defensive performance of the season in their rivalry game at the end. So the wheels really came off of this program at some point in the season, and they never, ever recovered.
No, for a program that just a couple years ago was in the Big Ten championship game.
That's right.
And so another one that'll be very interesting to see how they develop everything into the offseason now and look for the head coach.
The other thing it makes you realize, and again, this is not a dig against Ryan Walters, but it also makes you realize and appreciate how good of a football coach Jeff Brom was and is. He did a great job there. The only reason he left, I don't think he didn't want to get out of Purdue. He left because his alma mater gave him an opportunity to go to Louisville, and he's done a really good job at Louisville as well. So he's an excellent football coach.
Absolutely. Well said. Let's go to our Xfinity big connections here today. Oregon and Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. These 2 teams haven't played each other since the 1995 Rose Bowl, and we're talking about an outstanding Penn State team. They won that game 38-20, undefeated 1994 season. There were some conversations that national championship claims, whatever you might want to go. I'll let you take care of all of that because you've got the institutional Nittany Lion knowledge of all of it. But really one of the more explosive offenses, it feels like, that 94 Penn State team in college football history. So just the 5th matchup all time between the programs. Penn State leads 3-1. But when you go back to that game and you think about that 94 team, we were there this year. I think, was that the Illinois game we were there for, where they honored the 94 team?
Yes.
It was the 30th anniversary. The talent that they brought, especially on the offensive end, was really, really fun to watch.
Yeah, look, I played there. We won the national championship. We had a really, really good offense in 1982. We became the first team to ever won a national championship, gaining more yards passing than rushing. It had never been done in college football until that year. And we were only about 100 yards different, pass yards, rush yard. I mean, we were an excellent offense. That 94 team was the best offense Penn State's ever had. I mean, they were unbelievable. Kerry Collins was the quarterback. Kajana Carter was a first-round draft pick, first guy pick. Kyle Brady was an incredible tight end who became a great pro tight end. They had Bobby Ingram. They had wide receivers outside. That was a loaded offense, and really only had one close game, and that was that Illinois game.
Yep.
How about when we talked to Dan Lanning the other day? He said all championship teams have to win a game like that. That was Penn State's game that year in '94. I remember that Oregon team. They didn't have an undefeated season. They had lost a few games, and they went on a roll. and kind of won out and made their, earned their way into the Rose Bowl that year. I think their quarterback, I think it was a guy named Danny Sullivan. I remember him. And Mike Bellotti was the coach. I had done a couple Oregon games that year. I really liked Mike Bellotti, their head football coach. But Penn State just was way too talented for him in that game.
Yeah. Should be fun, this new rendition of it in the Big Ten Championship this year, and we'll see if this explosive Oregon offense can guide them to a victory. We'll go to some fan-submitted questions presented by Xfinity. First question, what was the biggest surprise of the Big Ten this season? I mean, there's two things where your head goes, but
yeah. I mean,
that's
Indiana. That's the Indiana Hoosiers. I mean, that was the biggest surprise, not just in the Big Ten, but in college football. And how quickly Curt Cignetti was able to turn things around from a mindset standpoint, first of all, and just to an expectation of being good and winning. And a lot of that was the coaches and the staff and the players that he brought with him from James Madison, who had great success there and expected to do the same thing in Bloomington, and they did.
I think it's hard to argue that it would be anything other than Indiana. The recency bias would tell you that Michigan beating Ohio State would be one of the biggest surprises within the Big Ten, but it's also a rivalry.
That was a big surprise. You're right.
Yeah. It's a surprise, but it's the rivalry games, and especially a game that has that much emotion. You just always know something weird can happen. So Indiana makes the most sense there. The second question is thoughts on year one of the quote Big 18.
Yeah. So actually, I think it was. I was fun, I mean, now the reality was when it was all said and done, there was a lot more excitement before the season started with the new teams and, the West Coast and trips there and trips East and all that. And at the end of the day, you had two teams that finished 6-6 and one that was 5-7, but the other one, Oregon, is number one and undefeated, the only undefeated team in college football. And I think because of that, and a little of the shine of Ohio State went off this past week when they lost to Michigan.
Yep.
But I think you could make an argument for that the Big 10 or the Big 18 now was the best conference in college football. I mean, if you take the top teams of Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State, I think that four is better than the top four of the SEC or the top four of any conference. Now that doesn't mean they're better than Texas or Georgia, those two teams that are playing the championship game. But after that in the SEC, it was just kind of just okay to me. And then the other conferences, is there more than one team? There are two teams at the most that would maybe fit in that. I don't think so. I think those top four in the Big Ten clearly are the best four.
I think the one thing that you said, and this is really just a case for the entire conference realignment for this year, with the new teams in the Big 12 and the Big 10, in the SEC and the ACC, and almost the entire Pac-12 disintegrating minus two teams that have stuck it out. The one thing that it created this year was the parity that we've expected. And only one undefeated team. This is the first time since 2007 that you got to the final week of the regular season and you only had one undefeated team remaining, which is pretty remarkable.
Yep.
And on top of that, you've got a number of teams that are 9-3 that are still going to be vying for a championship this year. And that's pretty cool. That's just not something that we're accustomed to seeing. So I think that parity that we expected this year came to fruition. The new conferences have helped that because they're deeper and they've got more talent dispersed around the country now. And the Big 18, and to your point, they've got four of the best teams in the entire country rolling into potentially the college football playoff. So it'll be fun to see how they fare against the rest of the conferences.
Yeah, and it's really the other thing that's cool, and we talked about how, in the very beginning of this season, there'll be no season like this, quite like this, ever again, because it was the first year of the 12-team playoff, first team of all the conference realignment. So everything was different this year. And it's evident even as we look at these championship games in a couple of conferences. We got SMU playing for an ACC championship, right? I mean, the first year in the conference. We have Arizona State, who was one of those Pac-12 teams, who's sitting there at 10-2 and playing really good football, playing for a Big 12 championship. We got Iowa State, who's never played for a championship, never been to the championship game, with a chance to play for it and win the championship and get in the college football playoff. So I think it's fascinating. Even a team like Clemson, who pretty much was written off. You know, they lost badly to Georgia in week 1 and everybody wrote them off. Then they got on a little bit of a run. Then they lost a couple games. But here they are in Charlotte this weekend playing for an ACC championship game. And if they beat SMU, they're going to be in the college football playoff. So crazy, crazy year that we've got more crazy zaniness ahead of us this weekend and beyond.
Yeah, Dabo Sweeney, Fran Brown says, "You're welcome over there in Clemson."
That was funny.
That was good. You can submit your questions to the show every week using #BigTalk. Thanks for tuning in. Big Talk with Todd and Noah. Don't forget to like, subscribe, download on the NBC Sports YouTube channel, wherever you get your audio podcast. And as always, we will chat with you again next week.